In the heart of the small town of Coatesville, Pennsylvania, the longest continuously operating steel company in the United States, heats and rolls the huge specialty plate for which it is famous. Known for its strength and durability, Lukens steel can be found in structures as diverse as the Benjamin Franklin Bridge and the icebreaker Manhattan. In 1969, Lukens produced the steel panels for the cathedral-shaped arches at the base of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. The success of this company can be traced back over 180 years to one person's determination.
I remember the first time I ever ran into Rebecca Lukens. It was November 6, 1989, and I had just joined the corporate communications department at Lukens Steel. I was being shown my office, and as I walked into that room, over the fireplace was a picture of a woman in a white cap and dark hair, very distinguished looking. And she obviously had the place of honor in the room. Your curiosity is immediately piqued. Why would a steel company have a woman's portrait hanging over a mantelpiece?
I have lately often thought I would pen a sketch of my life, which would be interesting to my children when their mother should slumber in her grave. My design is not merely to gratify their curiosity, but if possible to improve them by warning them of those errors in which my own inexperience too often led me, and by holding up to their view the bright example of their father. I will begin my narrative from the earliest years which memory can furnish me with incidents to relate.
Rebecca Webb Pennock was born January 6, 1794. Her parents, Isaac and Martha Pennock, were part of an extended network of Quaker farmers who had been among the earliest settlers of Chester County, Pennsylvania. Nearby, in the young nation's capital of Philadelphia, George Washington was serving his 6th year as President of the United States. The Americas had won their political freedom from England, but they had only just begun their struggle for economic freedom. As colonists, the American settlers had supplied England's industries with raw materials like cotton and iron, and imported expensive manufactured goods in return. Now, for the first time, U.S. citizens were free to build up their own manufacturing industry. In Chester County, farmers built small mills along the Brandywine River to produce flour, textiles, gunpowder, and iron. Although the Brandywine was too shallow for transportation, it had just the right run and drop to turn the wheels that powered these mills. And Isaac Pennock saw an opportunity. Not only did the mills need new iron tools and machinery, but iron was in great demand for the domestic products of the day, from farm tools to stoves and kitchen utensils. In 1793, Isaac founded the Federal Slitting Mill. Here, cast iron bars were reheated in a charcoal-fired forge, rolled into metal strips, and shaped into nails, barrel hoops, and wagon wheel rims. There was no formal education for iron masters, but Isaac was comfortable using and adapting basic tools. He hired experienced artisans whose skills had been passed down from generation to generation within families, and who had sophisticated knowledge of the composition of local iron ore.
What iron production involves is changing the composition so that there's more iron and less of some other materials. It's metallurgy. And what it depends on is people who have skills of knowing what's going on without being able to see it. People have to pay attention to what they hear. They have to pay attention to what they smell. They also pay attention to what they see, changes in colors. And often, when something's in the furnace, they can't even see it, so they really do depend on things like cues from sound. That kind of training takes time. It begins with apprenticeship, and then even in your early years as a craftsman, you're honing those skills.
Another challenge for mill owners was transportation. It often took days to travel by horse-drawn wagon to purchase raw materials or deliver finished goods. Isaac's slitting mill was strategically located for success. He could reach the major industrial market of Philadelphia in 2 days and had easy access to his main suppliers of raw material, the large iron forges of Hopewell and Hibernia.
Nothing quite matches the experience of being at a spot where history was actually made, and this is one of those spots. I'm standing in the raceway of Hibernia Furnace. This is where the water wheel would have been, and you can see by my size, where the scale of this thing is. And behind me is Brandywine Creek, and part of the creek's water would be diverted through here to power the enormous water wheel that powered the blowing engines that generated the blast for the furnace.
Isaac sometimes took his young daughter Rebecca with him on his travels around Chester County. She loved being with her father and spent as much time with him in his mill as she did at home with her mother.
Rebecca is the oldest child in a family where a boy isn't born until the 4th child. So in some ways, she takes the place of a son until there's a son comes along, and ultimately, even despite the fact that a son comes along. She grew up learning about technological processes by watching them. And then she had the added benefit of having a father who talked to her about it and explained it to her.
My father was generous and amiable, full of the kindest feelings. My ideas abound with the instance of his indulgence. Every innocent amusement was allowed me, and I have bounded over hill and dale as wild, happy, and joyous as youth could make me, when I neither knew fear nor feared misfortune.
Rebecca's mother, Martha Webb Pennock, came from an established and well-to-do Quaker family. Even as a young girl, Rebecca would have been strongly influenced by Quaker traditions and beliefs.
Quaker women would have given Rebecca Lukens a solid foundation to stand on. In the monthly meeting, the group of women would have gotten together and made plans around the schooling of children and around the care of people in the meeting who were ill or who were in need. Many Quaker women supported schools and a whole variety of civic things, hospitals and roads. So she would have surely had within her daily experience women who took leadership roles.
Years rolled by, and among my greatest enjoyments was the indulgence of being permitted to spend a week occasionally with some relatives. My cousins I loved with all the warmth of my nature. They were all much older than myself, and I eagerly listened to their instructions and practiced the lessons they taught.
Her cousins had attended Westtown, a nearby Quaker boarding school, and Rebecca was thrilled when her father agreed to send her there also. The Pennock family had little difficulty paying the substantial $64 a year tuition.
This is the student register, which shows that Rebecca Webb Pennock entered Westtown School in September of 1806. She was 12 years old at the time. The education was intended to be practical, so Rebecca's subjects would have included mathematics. The girls took math as well as the boys, reflecting the Quakers' belief in equality. The girls did have the same educational opportunities as the boys. The script and the presentation in the book would have been important as well as the problems that were worked. The students also took bookkeeping. Bookkeeping, again, would have been something very useful in their daily lives to learn how to keep their personal accounts or perhaps even business accounts.
Rebecca received instruction in geography, history, writing, surveying, and astronomy. The girls at Westtown learned needlework, but the product was to be simple and useful, not ornamental. First, the alphabet, then religious verse. and finally, a globe. One student wrote home,
Dear Mother and Father, I expect to have a good deal of trouble in making the globes, yet I hope they will recompense me for all my trouble. For they certainly will be a curiosity to you and of considerable use in instructing my brothers and sisters, and to strengthen my own memory respecting the supposed shape of our earth, and the manner in which it moves on its axis.
academic lessons were never separate from religious lessons. Even grammar exercises contained moral or social stories. After her year at Westtown, Rebecca continued her Quaker education at the Wilmington Boarding School for Girls.
I always look on this period of my life with pleasure, and even now love to retrace it. I was rapidly improving, a favorite with my teachers, and at the head of all of my classes. I was young, ardent, and happy. Shakespeare awoke the noblest feelings of my heart, and many, many is the night I have hid in my chamber, the light serving me to indulge in my favorite pursuit till the morning's dawn.
The young country was growing up along with Rebecca. Its markets were expanding, and new machinery was being built that would take over more and more of the work previously accomplished by human labor. Even minor technological improvement increased productivity, and imaginative innovation appeared everywhere.
The United States patent system was in its infancy. Most inventions were never patented, and most inventions are essentially minute improvements, variations on a theme. But that's the nature of progress. Most progress, I think, is incremental. It doesn't proceed by leaps and bounds.
You can't do something over and over again without starting to notice, well, maybe I could do it a little differently. And you probably don't think of it as I'm inventing, or even I'm finding a better way to do it. It's the way that you end up doing it. You know, you take a nylon sock and stick it over the outlet from your washing machine to catch the lint, and you use a rubber band or some other tie to do it. Those kinds of little inventions, we think of them as kind of hints for Heloise, are in fact inventions also. Anything that is a tool, a way of making or doing something, is a technology.
In response to this growth, new iron mills sprang up and old ones were expanded. In Chester County, the Brandywine River and its tributaries provided the water power for many of them. In 1810, Isaac Pennock and a neighbor bought a 102-acre farm from Moses Coates. The land straddled the Brandywine River and also had easy access to the new Philadelphia-Lancaster Turnpike. There was an old sawmill on the property which they converted into a primitive ironworks and named it the Brandywine Rolling Mill and Nail Factory. Unknown to anyone at the time, it would be Isaac's decision to purchase and renovate this property that would determine the extraordinary future of both his iron mill and his young daughter. This same year, 16-year-old Rebecca completed her schooling and returned home.
For a long time, I felt lonely and isolated. I had no companions to mingle my thoughts with. I was the eldest of 2 brothers and 4 sisters, and George, the youngest, an infant, was placed under my care. Often I would wander with him over the high hills, and when tired, I would seat myself on some fallen tree and wander in a world of my own creating.
Rebecca missed the excitement of her studies and the company of her friends. And when her father invited her to join him on a trip to visit relatives in Philadelphia, she welcomed the opportunity. While there, a friend of her mother's came to see her, accompanied by a young medical doctor.
She was not alone, and I felt my face glow as she turned to introduce me to her companion, a Dr. Lukens. He bowed with a peculiar grace, and for a moment my eyes rested on his interesting face and tall and commanding figure. His hair was the deepest shade of black, his eyes hazel, And his other features were manly and remarkably handsome. Yet it was the expression of his countenance that most interested me. It spoke of lofty, unbending principle, while the benevolence which beamed from his eye and the suavity of his manner won their way to my heart. Late in the afternoon, I was sitting alone, and after throwing down Scott's fascinating Lady of the Lake, which had claimed my attention for some time, I heard a step and the voice of Dr. Lukens in the hall behind me. I felt my face glow as I turned to meet him. I was provoked at myself for feeling the confusion I did, and mortified I had so little command over those feelings. After tea, my aunt proposed a walk. He gently drew my arm within his own, and silent and embarrassed, I walked by his side. The moon had arisen in all her splendor, and our eyes rested on the beautiful scenery before us, softened by her rays. At length he spoke of his own feelings and declared how happy he had been since we met. At my first seeing thee in the city, I determined, if possible, to excite an interest in thy heart. Say then, dear Rebecca, have I succeeded, and may I hope to win thy love? I can offer thee a heart that will love and cherish thee as the first best gift of heaven. My heart beat with painful quickness, and I felt happy. I, the happiest of the happy. I knew my heart and felt if once I loved, it would be with ardor, and that forever. And as soon as I could still the agitation, I replied by a few words of assent and a reference to my father.
On March 25, 1813, at the Fallowfield Meeting House in Chester County, Pennsylvania, Dr. Charles Lukens and Rebecca Webb Pennock, taking each other by the hand, promised with divine assistance to be faithful and affectionate husband and wife until death should separate them. Rebecca Lukens was 19 years old. The young couple settled near Rebecca's family. Their first child, Martha, was born, followed a few years later by another daughter, Elizabeth. Charles had become caught up in the excitement of the expanding iron industry and went to work in Isaac's company. The American Industrial Revolution was in full swing. The market was demanding an increasingly higher quality in its iron. The new steam engines were now providing power for industry, and engineers hoped they could design them small enough to power ships and wagons. The iron used to build these steam engines, however, had to be of top strength and consistency in order to contain the heat and pressure built up inside them. Any weakness in the iron would allow for dangerous explosions. Charles recognized in these demands a unique opportunity, and with an eye towards this growing market for steam engines, he and Rebecca decided to lease Isaac's Brandywine iron and nail factory. In 1817, the family of four moved on to the old Coates Farm property.
We found that everything about the house, mill, and farm was in a forlorn and wretched state. The mill had been hastily built, and the harness was too light to bear the weight of the necessary castings. We told my father I thought it scarce right for us to have so much to do, that the works should have been put in repair before we came. His reply invariably was, "What you are doing now will make it so much the better for yourselves, for when I am gone, this property will be yours."
With this incentive, the young couple began rebuilding the decrepit mill, adapting and purchasing the equipment they needed to produce a higher quality of iron. Charles and his craftsmen focused on pressing boilerplate for the new steam engines and found a way to roll a plate of iron that was wider and more uniform in strength. In 1818, their Brandywine Iron Works produced America's first rolled boilerplate.
If we could visit the Lukens rolling mill, we would see as we approached it the sluiceway bringing water to the large overshot wheel which powered the mill's massive machinery. Going inside, we would immediately be struck by the noise of metal upon metal as sheets of iron were pressed and cut and dropped. The gears, powered by the water wheel, drove the rollers and the power shears. The working environment was dirty, noisy, hot, and dangerous. Orders were given by shouts and hand signals. The iron slabs, which arrived from furnaces such as Hibernia and Hopewell, were heated red hot in furnaces to make them malleable. They were then moved to the rollers, where they were pressed into progressively smaller thicknesses for stovepipes, boiler iron, and other plate.
During this busy time, the Lukens family grew to 7, welcoming the birth of 2 sons, Charles and Isaac, and a daughter, Isabella. Rebecca had her hands full, raising children, running the 19th century household, and remaining a very present partner in decisions about the iron mill.
The kind of work that a woman of Rebecca's era would have grown up doing would have involved a lot of chemical activities. If you made soap, you were involved in chemical processes. They didn't go to the store and buy yeast. They had to keep their yeast alive. Each time they made bread, they had to go to their culture. Flour wasn't standard. They needed to know the behavior of the particular components. They were dealing with organic chemistry, which is a whole lot more complicated than the inorganic chemistry that went on in the mill.
But as their family grew and their business expanded, Rebecca and Charles were dealt a series of personal blows.
She grew up in a time and lived through a time when mortality was a fact of life. There were epidemic diseases, cholera epidemics, yellow fever epidemics, which would sweep from one city and town to another following the trade routes. People died commonly of pneumonia, diphtheria, whooping cough, a bad fever. There are any number of things that could take life, and did.
In short succession, Rebecca and Charles lost their infant son Isaac and Rebecca's beloved father. While still mourning these losses, their only remaining son Charles died also. During this period of grief, Rebecca learned that her father's will did not clearly pass ownership of Brandywine to her and Charles, as had been their clear understanding. And her mother Martha contested Rebecca's ownership of the mill. Meanwhile, Charles Lukens' reputation for producing quality iron had attracted the attention of John Elgar, an imaginative Quaker engineer. Elgar hoped to open up America's rocky eastern rivers to trade by building the first iron-hulled steamboat, the Codorus, and he was looking for the strongest and lightest iron on the market. At the Brandywine Iron Works, Lukens was able to produce the thin iron sheets that Elgar needed for the construction of his steamship. But shortly after this plate was rolled and the order filled, tragedy struck again, changing forever the fate of the Lukens family and of the Brandywine Iron Works.
In the summer of 1825, I lost my dear and excellent husband, and then commenced my hard and weary struggle with life.
Charles Lukens died suddenly of a fever in June of 1825. 31-year-old Rebecca was expecting their 6th child, and the business was still $15,000 in debt. Before he died, Charles had asked Rebecca for a promise that she would continue to run the Brandywine Iron Works and carry out the plans they had made together.
Dr. Lukens had just commenced the boilerplate business, and he was sanguine in his hopes for success. He wished me to continue, and I promised to comply. Mother said it would be folly for me to remain, though she thought as a female I was not fit to carry on such a concern.
Rebecca took Charles' dying request seriously, and while struggling to keep her debtors at bay, she reassured customers that the Brandywine Iron Works would still fill their orders as promised. Charles's brother Solomon Lukens came to help Rebecca during this period and stayed on as her mill manager for many years.
Dr. Lukens had many good and firm friends, and they all stood by me. The workmen were tried and faithful. And so, with some fear, but more courage, I began to struggle for a livelihood. Now I look back at my daring.
She had ample reason, if she'd wanted it, to take refuge in grief and just seal herself off cocoon-like from the rest of the world. And instead, when her husband died, a husband whom she loved, she essentially drew herself up, made sure that her children wanted for nothing insofar as it was in her capacity to provide it, including love, and went on.
Only 5 months after Charles's death, Elgar's iron-hulled steamship, the Codorus, was launched on the Susquehanna River to huge fanfare and front-page news. Its success established Lukens' reputation as a company that could produce top-quality specialty plate.
I had the pleasure of seeing the Codorus sail in great majesty up the Susquehanna, amidst the cheers of hundreds and perhaps thousands of spectators. Her course was not direct, but 'twas serpentine on account of the numerous shoals. She proceeded up the river at the rate of 4 miles an hour. To the very ingenious mechanics who have constructed this boat, too much praise cannot be awarded for having risked their all in this important experiment, which promises such incalculable advantage to the extensive regions bordering on the Susquehanna.
A few weeks after the successful launch of the Codorus, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter, whom she named Charles Anna, in memory of her late husband.
It would be really interesting to know what sorts of tensions existed within Rebecca herself over how she resolved that dilemma of living in a world where she had to spend all of her time paying attention to the details of this manufacturing business, and yet also living in a time which said to her, what women are supposed to do is take care of children, take care of the home. My sense is that she did that by saying, in effect, I am taking care of the children by running the manufacturing business.
Women were supposed to stand behind their husbands. Women were supposed to let their husbands manage their affairs, their economic affairs. We're beginning to learn that 18th and early 19th century women who were widowed often did not remarry if they had an economy that would support them, because they knew that by remarrying they would give up the control of that economy to a spouse.
In 1832, Rebecca lost her 15-year-old daughter Elizabeth. Devastated again by grief, Rebecca threw herself into completely overhauling the mill.
I have thoroughly repaired the mansion house, built good and substantial tenant houses for my workmen, and put much lime and fencing on the farm. The mill has been rebuilt from the very foundation. The dam entirely rebuilt, wheels put in, castings, furnaces, mill head, mill house. Not a single vestige of the old remains.
She takes this operation, turns the operation around, actually starts making a profit, only to run into the chaos, the panic of 1837.
All is paralyzed, business at a standstill. I have as yet lost nothing, but am in constant fear. I have stopped rolling for a few weeks and set my men to repairing the race dam.
She went through a period, an economic downturn, which was a very important challenge that all of the American entrepreneurs faced in the Industrial Revolution. Her caution in selling to people who weren't trustworthy saved her, but so did her willingness to spend some money during downtime to keep the skilled workmen around, because long term, then they were grateful and were more likely to stick around. So she made work on her farm.
One of the things you could see in the way Rebecca Lukens handled her business affairs is that she saw a kind of that of God in all the people who worked around her, and saw her work as part of a larger vision of using the resources of the world well. And among the resources of the world were her workers. When it became difficult to maintain them, she figured out ways to maintain them and figured out ways to continue a relationship of respect between herself and her workers.
Between 1832 and 1850, anywhere between 30 and 60% of the ironworks either failed or simply went out of business. They went bankrupt. That wasn't true of Rebecca Lukens' operation. Maybe it's her religious values and her values as a human being and her experience with hard personal times that is responsible for this, but her workers stay loyal. Her creditors stay loyal, and more than that, they have confidence in her. Through all this, she manages not only to keep her head above water, but to make real headway against a set of odds that sank a lot of people.
To be a successful businesswoman in the early 19th century, you had to know a lot of things, and a lot of really varied things. There was no standardized monetary system, for example.
There was hard money. There were U.S. banknotes. There were commercial banknotes. There were state banknotes. A $10 note would, in the neighborhood in which it had been issued, would get $10 in gold. But you go much further than that neighborhood, say 100 miles away, and it would be discounted. 3%, 4%, 5%, 10%, and in a crisis, it could be discounted 36%. Rebecca Lukens had to know which notes were good, which merchants could be relied upon to honor them, so that she could make quick and enlightened business decisions.
She would have had to have been able to understand very clearly what the mathematics of all of that were. What would happen if she charged a certain percentage of interest on a loan over a period of time, and what she could expect to gain from that.
By the 1830s, engineers had succeeded in building a steam engine light enough for use in trains and ships. And steam locomotives and steamboats began transporting people and goods up and down the East Coast.
We know that for Rebecca, changes in transportation are fundamental to the new market that she's seeking to serve by her innovations in the rolling mill. She's rolling plate for steam engine boilers. And steam engine boilers are used on steamboats and they're used on railroads. And those are the two new fast forms of transportation. For the first time, people can move faster than horses and oxen. So instead of it taking a day to go 20 miles, you can go in and visit in the city without it being such a big decision. This boiler behind me is the real heart of the steam engine house. This is where the steam builds up enough pressure to power the steam engine. And this is the kind of plate that the Lukens mill was making. You look at it, it doesn't look like a big deal. The plate itself, our attention might go to these rivets because they stand out. But it's the strength of this boilerplate that allows the steam engineer to build up a head of steam to power this steam engine. And that can either make machinery run or it can make steam engines run. As a manifestation of incredible power harnessed by human beings, harnessed by engineering, harnessed by science, the steam engine became a metaphor for change and for power and for progress. These locomotives were enormous. You could sense the power. Many medical men of the day pronounced the railroad, at least in its initial decades, as unsafe for human transportation because it would upset the body's humors and the equilibrium. You go rattling along at the breakneck speed of anywhere between 15 and 25 miles an hour. The railroads always announced faster speeds. For a businesswoman like Rebecca, what that means is information travels more rapidly. So every time you increase the speed of transportation, You can draw a circle around Philadelphia and indicate the area within which information moves really, really freely. What that does for a mill proprietor is give her more choices.
By 1840, 3,300 miles of railroad track had been built. Samuel Morse had obtained a patent for the telegraph. And Rebecca Lukens had agents selling her products in markets from Boston to Louisiana.
One of the things that we often forget when we think about business, because we have this legend of the individual who pulls himself up by his bootstraps, the sort of Andrew Carnegie model, is that many business people had very good sort of support system, and Rebecca had hers.
Rebecca had 3 really important networks. One, quite immediately, is the old Pennsylvania families that she's connected to, and then more broadly, that community in Philadelphia and the community in the Brandywine, 2 real important industrial areas that she encountered just kind of walking about, moving in social circles. Another is her Quaker network. There are a lot of Quakers in these businesses.
Being a Quaker and a business person meant more than just having another network.
The fundamental premise upon which Quakerism is built is the idea that there is no division between the secular and the sacred, that one's business life is a part of one's spiritual life. Quaker business practice was deeply based in integrity, that what you should do is always provide fair value for fair value received. That you should always make sure that what you sell in the outside world is worth exactly what you sell it for, and that you wouldn't negotiate about price because the price was set based on how much energy you had put into this item that they're buying, and therefore it was always the same for everyone. One of the many things that makes Rebecca Lukens interesting is the way that she carries over her belief into her daily life. Rebecca's example of a way of living one's beliefs was to refuse to sell to a Navy Yard, even though the people at the Navy Yard reminded her that there was no war and that this wouldn't be used for military purposes. She still was very clear that she would not sell to anything that was even remotely related to war.
The rules of discipline were the regulations that Friends used in conducting their business and personal lives. It wasn't a theology so much as a practical application of the Quaker principles of simplicity, peace, equality, values such as those. One knew that one could expect fair treatment from a Quaker in business.
The Book of Discipline advised the use of arbitration rather than the courts in settling disputes. However, the Industrial Revolution brought with it complex legal issues.
The rolling mills were operated with water power, like most other manufacturing concerns. And as more people wanted to get involved in manufacturing, as it became more lucrative, who had the first rights to the use of that water power became a really, really important question. By the early 19th century, a lot more people were using the courts litigiously, particularly over questions like water rights, exactly the issue that eventually wound up bringing Rebecca into court for her business.
I have been at the whole expense of defending the property from an attempt made to destroy the water right which I carried on the rolling mill. I think the expense of winning my suit with the Yearsleys amounted to upwards of $800.
She was pulled into the court system because of these larger forces that were going on, that were economic and technological. But once she entered it as a female litigant, in effect, she then opens the door for a more acceptance of the idea that women can act in a court of law on their own.
Economics is never divorced from politics. And in the iron industry, in the United States, competition from British iron masters was intense and potentially ruinous. the British were notorious in the 1820s and the 1830s and 40s for practicing dumping, that is, selling their iron in the United States at a price below the cost of production plus transportation. And the idea was to drive American producers out of business. And so American ironmasters believed that they needed the help of a tariff, that is essentially a tax on imported iron.
In the presidential election of 1844, Rebecca endorsed Henry Clay because of his support of protective tariffs. And although as a woman she could not vote in the election, she joined other ironmasters in campaigning for him. By some accounts, a political poem that she wrote was used by her workers at a political rally.
We fondly hope for better days when every furnace fire shall blaze, and streaming to the midnight sky, proclaim to all prosperity.
Despite support from many industries, Henry Clay lost to James Polk, who, as predicted, slashed tariffs, provoking a depression in the American iron industry. That same year, Rebecca's mother died, finally leaving Rebecca full legal ownership of the Brandywine Iron Works. Rebecca had taken a risky, debt-ridden mill and turned it into a flourishing business with a yearly revenue of more than $80,000. And part of her stewardship of the business had been to ensure that it would remain in the family. Her daughters' homes were just up the road from the mill. Isabella and Charles Houston lived at Terracina. Charles Anna, her youngest daughter, moved to Philadelphia when she married Dr. William Tingley.
Probably because of her own life experiences, Rebecca made sure that her daughters would be able to run the business if they had to. They had the skills. She made sure they had an education. She created the trust in such a way that both daughters were protected individually, which is important. And they were just lucky their husbands lived. They weren't forced into the same kind of situation that she had been in, but they could have done it if they had to.
In 1847, Rebecca Lukens began to retire from actually running the mill. She was 53 years old and had run the Brandywine Iron Works for 22 years. She turned over the management of the business to her sons-in-law, Abraham Gibbons and Charles Houston. The company would continue to be under the management of the family until the end of the 20th century.
The way in which they incorporated her personal story into the story of the company, I think, is a very important element of what set that particular corporation apart in some ways from other steel companies. So she clearly had an impact on that corporation over a long period of time.
I'm Charles Lukens, Houston III, and I'm fifth generation relative to Rebecca Lukens. When I was growing up, right here in Coatesville, I would visit my grandparents, and in many cases they would talk about Rebecca Lukens and what it really means to carry on the family heritage. Customers know the quality of the name Lukens. And that goes back to Rebecca as well, because of the person that she was and what she has done in terms of influence of her family to be people of integrity and quality.
In the last several years, there has been a very large interest in Rebecca Lukens. I'd say very definitely related to the growing interest in women's history. Rebecca's birthday in 1994 was the 200th anniversary of her birth, and we decided to do a commemoration here, and that brought a lot of publicity. Fortune magazine picked it up and decided to honor Rebecca that same year by naming her to their Fortune magazine Business Hall of Fame. And the woman was heroic. And of course, in situations like this, myths do grow.
And now, Woman of Steel, starring Helen Hayes as Rebecca Lukens on the DuPont Cavalcade of America.
What are all those wagons? Stop one of them. I want to talk to them.
Hey there.
Yeah?
Hold up.
What for?
This is Mrs. Lukens. She wants to talk to you.
Whoa.
Enos Waters, if you and your people will stay, I will not close the mill.
How could you run a mill? You're a woman. Besides, you got 4 children.
Yes, Mrs. Waters, I have 4 children and no husband. What would you do?
Don't say no more, Miss Lukens. There's a look in your eye that my father told me he saw in your father's eye when they called him a fool for starting the mill. When I see that look again, it decides me to stay and see what'll happen. Plato, Cicero, turn around and get at it. Get at it. Come on.
You can forget the myths and the facts are good enough. Women just didn't run manufacturing plants. And even today, I think you'd have to scratch pretty hard to find a woman in the top executive position in any of our major American steel companies.
What brought her to life for me more than anything else was her autobiography that she penned for her children to tell them about her life as a girl and where she came from. And she's very detailed in what she remembers, what the countryside was like. She writes very emotionally about her family and the bonds that she had with her husband, her children, the workers in the mill. There's always, even when she's writing about business or legal issues, she still has that very poetical quality to her language.
I can remember the first time I saw the autobiography. It was in the attic in the main office. And I can still remember I pulled off a rubber band, and here was the 14-page handwritten original manuscript all wrapped up in a box. I just sat there amid the dust of the floor and read this thing, absolutely fascinated. I mean, here's this humanity, the feeling, the love that comes through in this autobiography.
One of the dreams that has grown out of the community in Coatesville is to preserve the Lukens Historic District, the historic houses of the Lukens and Houston families and various related mill properties, and combine them into a historic area that focuses on iron and steel heritage in western Chester County. And everything that the company started with is still here in one form or another. It all can be brought back to life.
During her retirement, Rebecca could finally turn more of her attention to her home and family. Despite her pleasure in this, she found herself missing the excitement of work and also reflecting on the value of her life.
Awoke this morning with a bad headache. After a disturbed and weary night, Isabella sent me a cup of coffee into my sitting room. I felt better and walked in the garden, gathered a few roses, and sat down to think and write. I look over my life with regret. So many opportunities of being useful, of doing much good, utterly neglected. And now, at this late period of time, it seems almost a hopeless task to redeem the error of the past. I must try to do more. Be more energetic in the cause of humanity.
In early September, her daughter Isabella and son-in-law Charles Houston invited her to join them on an excursion to the Lehigh Mountains of Pennsylvania. In her letters home to her daughter Martha, Rebecca boasts about riding the country's first gravity-propelled train, which had originally been designed to move coal from hilltop mines down to barges on the river.
My dear Martha, I am no coward, but I will confess when I looked at the formidable road by which we had to ascend, my heart began to throb, and I thought of you all and whether I should ever again see you. It gave me a thrill, almost a shudder, to view the grand panorama spread below. We then made a circuit of the mines and descended very pleasantly, guided by the brake in our little car. Vast sums have been expended in facilitating the raising and transporting of coal, and it seems that gigantic efforts have been made to effect these ends.
In 1849, Rebecca's youngest daughter, Charles Anna, died in childbirth. And Rebecca made another deathbed promise, this time to take care of Charles Anna's newborn daughter, Annie. Rebecca brought Annie home to Brandywine Mansion and began a new journal where she could express her grief freely.
5 months have passed since I lost my dear daughter, and in that time how much of real sorrow have I seen. The days have dragged heavily along. At first the blow was stunning. I could scarce think of it as real. Anne, bright and lovely in all her fresh young beauty, was ever before me, or pale and suffering on her deathbed as I last beheld her. Her image was always before me. I slept in her room, in the very corner where her bed had stood. I sat by her window and looked out at all the beauty of early morning. This parting by death is a sorrowful thing to those who are left to mourn the loss of what alone made life a pleasure to them. Her faith was so strong, her hopes so bright. But why need I dwell on this? Who can tell unless they have felt in all the gushing, tender love of a mother's heart? The grave covers my sweet, my beautiful one. Then let me weep. My dear little Annie is now the light of my house, the bright sunbeam in my dreary life. She calls me Mama, and how my heart bounds to her. Sweet child of my own dear Anne. Nothing could be nearer my heart. Spring, summer, and autumn have come and gone, and more stern winter reigns monarch of all around.
The last entry in her journal is dated January 7th, 1852. "I feel so weak," she wrote, "that without his aid I can do nothing. Lord, will thou not help thy poor unworthy servant?" On December 10th, 1854, Rebecca Lukens died after great conflict of spirit, according to her obituary in The Friend. But on her deathbed, with countenance beaming with thankfulness, she said, "I have brought my sins not in handfuls, but in one load, and sat them at my Savior's feet, and he has borne for me what I could not bear for myself." In 1859, the company was renamed the Lukens Rolling Mill in Rebecca's honor. It would become the longest continuously operating steel company in North America.
A better way of understanding the growth and the operation of the iron industry in the first half of the 19th century in this country could not be found than to study some of the remarkable personalities that made up that industry. And Rebecca Lukens stands as, I think, the most remarkable person in the industry, not because she was the most innovative, she wasn't, not because she ran the largest operation, far from it, but because in an industrial world populated virtually exclusively by men, here was this woman who not only holds her own with them, but outdoes many of them.
Rebecca's story, I think, is a good story about American business. And we can think of her as a typical American entrepreneur. It's not just a story about women. It's not just a story about a particular woman and her experience running a business. This is also a much bigger story just about America.
Certainly she did not see herself as a trendsetter or a path breaker or anything like that. She was not trying to make a name for herself in the business, but she did.
If I had to pick one object to look at closely as a way of getting in touch with Rebecca, it would have to be boilerplate. It's what makes her operation innovative. It's what makes her operation central to industrialization. If you look at boilerplate, it looks like nothing. It looks like this kind of blank sheet of iron. But there's a mystery inside that sheet, that piece of metal that we can't see, that we kind of have to take on faith. You have to know if you're buying boilerplate from Lukens, you are going to be able to count on that boilerplate holding the forces that boilers had to hold.
I have lately often thought I would pen a sketch of my life, which would be interesting to my children when their mother should slumber in her grave. I will begin my narrative from the earliest years which memory can furnish me with incidents to relate.